He thought she was just a cleaner, until she showed up with a baby and a law degree. You have two options: resign voluntarily or be dismissed for cause. The words sliced through the silence like a knife as Cheryl Hammond, head of HR at Wallace & Company, sneered across the table at Danielle Carter, a 24-year-old single mom who had spent the past 2 years cleaning offices no one cared to enter. But Cheryl didn't know the whole story. And Danielle wasn't about to beg. Danielle had been accused of breaking into the CEO's office. A grainy photo showed her in the leather chair. But it conveniently left out her 4-month-old daughter, Lila, whom she was breastfeeding during a medical emergency. Cheryl had doctored the footage, ignoring reports from security that confirmed the emergency. Danielle left that meeting with her head high and a secret file of damning evidence. What Cheryl didn't realize was that Danielle had been quietly collecting emails, recordings, and documents for 2 years, evidence of racial discrimination, financial fraud, and abuse of power. While Cheryl saw a cleaner, Danielle was actually a law school graduate with a specialization in labor law. 3 days later, CEO Jonathan Wallace called Danielle in for a meeting after reviewing the unedited footage. What followed was a corporate reckoning that ended with Cheryl's termination, public disgrace, and Danielle's rise to Director of Human Resources. Because when you confuse humility with weakness and silence with ignorance, you just might hand the keys of power to the very person you tried to break. The cleaner you mocked might be the smartest person in the room. No one paid much attention to Elena Brooke. At 25, she pushed her cleaning cart through the crating cart through the plains. Marble hallways of Langston Enterprises, like a ghost, silent, invisible, and beneath notice. The executives barely glanced at her. But what they didn't know was that Elena was always watching, listening, remembering. 2 years earlier, Elena had applied for a junior administrative position but was rejected without an interview. Desperate to feed her newborn son Micah, she took the only available role, night shift cleaner. But while others saw a woman with rubber gloves and a mop, Elena carried something far more dangerous. A memory like a steel trap, and a quiet, relentless thirst for justice. Every evening, as the sun disappeared behind the skyscrapers, Elena entered offices, abandoned by their owners. She noticed things: unlocked computers, sticky notes with passwords, conversations left half-finished in email drafts. Over time, she began collecting digital footprints, casual jokes from executives laced with racism, performance reviews, rewritten to protect friends, and hush-hush payments to contractors with no company record. But Elena never acted. Not yet. Her moment came when she overheard Monica Stein, the company's polished but ruthless director of operations, laughing in the executive lounge. "The cleaner? Please. She's barely literate. I could frame her for theft, and no one would question it." Monica's friends roared with laughter. What Monica didn't know was that Elena had already recorded her saying something worse, mocking another employee's accent and joking about diversity hires. When Monica later accused Elena of tampering with confidential files, an incident the cameras proved didn't happen, Elena was suspended. But instead of begging for her job back, she handed over a flash drive to the company's CEO, Raymond Langston, who had just returned from a long business trip. The flash drive contained 2 years' worth of documentation, racist comments, financial fraud, and direct violations of labor law. Elena didn't just present accusations. She brought proof. And then came the twist no one expected. "I have one more thing to add," Elena said calmly, looking Raymond in the eye. "I graduated, top of my class from Whitmore Law School. Labor rights concentration. I took this job not because I lacked qualifications, but because your hiring system is broken." Raymond was stunned. Within hours, Monica was suspended. A week later, she was terminated and charged with evidence tampering, fraud, and racial discrimination. The board moved quickly to contain the damage, launching a full investigation into past practices. But Elena wasn't done. She presented a 34-page proposal. New hiring protocols, protections for marginalized employees, and a whistleblower program with anonymous safeguards. Raymond didn't hesitate. He offered her a permanent position as Director of Equity and Ethics. Elena accepted, not for revenge, but for transformation. 6 months later, Langston Enterprises became a case study in corporate reform. Employee morale surged. Lawsuits dropped. For the first time, janitorial staff and junior employees had a voice at the leadership table. And Elena? She now walks those same marble floors in a tailored blazer, often with Micah in her arms, as she reviews policies that affect thousands. The same people who once ignored her now take notes when she speaks. Because what they finally understood was this: some people aren't cleaning up messes. They're collecting receipts. The woman they dismissed was never just a cleaner. She was a lawyer, a strategist, a mother, and the living proof that humility isn't weakness. It's the quiet strength of someone waiting for the right moment to rise. You invited me as a joke, but I showed up with dignity. The moment Vanessa Turner stepped into the grand ballroom of the Harrington estate, silence swept across the crowd like a sudden chill. She wore a flowing sapphire gown, head held high, elegance in every step. But just days earlier, she had been scrubbing marble floors in the very mansion, where she now stood face to face with the people who once laughed at her. Presence. Among them was Bradley Harrington, heir to the Harrington fortune, who had extended the invitation, not out of kindness, but out of cruelty. It was supposed to be a joke, a cleaning woman at a charity gala? Hilarious, he thought. Let's see how she handles real silverware. What Bradley didn't know was that Vanessa wasn't just a maid. She was Vanessa Blackwood, daughter of Harold Blackwood, the estate's rightful heir and Bradley's half-sister. For 2 years, Vanessa had worked anonymously inside the Harrington mansion. She had learned every corner, listened quietly, and gathered documents, audio files, and financial records. She had even kept a diary from the estate's late butler, who once told her, "Truth waits for its moment, and when it comes, the world shifts." That moment had arrived. At the gala, when Bradley began to mock her presence, Vanessa stepped onto the stage and cleared her throat. "I know some of you may be wondering why I'm here," she began. "I've been wondering the same about many of you for years, especially those who built fortunes by burying truths they thought would never be unearthed." Gasps echoed as she held up a leather-bound book. Harold Blackwood's will. Long thought. To be destroyed. I am Harold's daughter. Conceived during a time the family wished to erase. But my mother never forgot, and neither did I. What you see here is proof DNA, testimony, and a notarized confession from the man who watched the lie unfold. Bradley's face turned pale. The room erupted in whispers. Vanessa continued, unwavering. "For 2 years I cleaned the home my father built, while those who benefited from his silence mocked my existence. But I wasn't there for pity. I was there for truth. And tonight, that truth returns home." Lawyers entered the room holding boxes of evidence. Journalists followed. Vanessa handed the documents to the family's estate attorney and stepped down from the stage. What followed was swift. Bradley was removed from his executive position. Fraudulent inheritance filings were exposed. And the estate, long a symbol of arrogance and exclusion, became the centerpiece of a dramatic transformation. Vanessa didn't seek revenge. She sought restoration. She took the reins of the family trust, not to hoard wealth, but to rebuild. Within months, she launched the Turner Foundation, providing scholarships, housing aid, and employment for marginalized women. many of whom had once cleaned for the very people who had overlooked them. 6 months later, Vanessa stood on the same stage, this time to accept a Civic Leadership Award. She looked out over the crowd, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Power, she said, is not in the wealth you inherit, but in the dignity you defend. And Bradley, he watched from afar. A footnote in the story of a woman he once tried to humiliate, who rose with grace. Proof that some people don't fight back with fists. They rise with truth. She let a disabled boy lead the dance and changed a billionaire's life forever. At the corner table of a luxury steakhouse, Richard Whitman, one of the city's most powerful billionaires, watched his 10-year-old son, Eli, struggle to cut his food. The boy's left hand trembled, paralyzed, since the accident that took his mother's life. Richard, dressed in a tailored navy suit, was busy signing off emails between bites of steak, only occasionally glancing up. He loved his son, but he didn't know how to connect with him anymore. And then something unexpected happened. A young waitress named Danielle Moore, dressed in a simple black uniform, approached to refill their water. Eli looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes and asked quietly, "Do you like music?" Danielle smiled. "I love it. Why? I used to dance with my mom before the accident." Without hesitation, she offered her hand. "Would you like to dance now?" Richard's head snapped up. "That won't be necessary," he said sharply. But Danielle ignored him. Her eyes were only on Eli. And before Richard could stop it, the boy, limping, bracing on her hand, was swaying gently in the center of the room to the soft jazz playing overhead. The restaurant fell silent. Eli giggled. For the first time in years, he was leading. Richard didn't speak. He didn't need to. Something cracked in him that night. And it wasn't shame. It was recognition of how much he'd buried under power, wealth, and meetings. He remembered his wife's words. He doesn't need a fortress. He needs a father. The next morning, Richard tracked Danielle down. He offered her a job, a private dance tutor, for Eli, whatever she wanted. But Danielle refused. "He doesn't need control," she said. "He needs space to grow." She invited Richard to visit Freedom Steps, a small dance center she co-founded for children with disabilities. Out of curiosity and a gnawing sense of guilt, he went. What he saw shocked him. Children in wheelchairs twirling with joy, teens with hearing impairments, tapping rhythms through floor vibrations. It wasn't just a studio, it was a sanctuary of dignity. And Danielle? She wasn't just a waitress. She was a licensed therapist, dance educator, and co-author of a grant proposal his own foundation had rejected a year earlier. Without ever reading it, Richard stood in the back of that studio and cried. Within weeks, he announced full sponsorship of Freedom Steps. No conditions. No branding. Just backing. He bought them a new building, funded scholarships, and gave Danielle full control. "You lead," he said simply. "I'll follow." Under Danielle's leadership, the program flourished. Eli gained confidence, mobility, and eventually taught a younger boy his first dance step. And Richard, he stopped trying to fix his son and started dancing with him instead. 6 months later, at the grand reopening of the Freedom Step Center, Richard took the stage. "My son learned to walk again, not just with his feet, but with his spirit," he said. "And I learned what real leadership looks like. From a woman our society might have ignored." He looked at Danielle in the front row. "Thank you for reminding me that dignity can't be bought, tested, or controlled. It must be honored." The room stood in thunderous applause, not for the billionaire, but for the woman who let a disabled boy lead, and in doing so, taught everyone what it truly means to follow. The janitor everyone mocked stepped into the ring and left a champion without throwing a punch. The martial arts studio was buzzing that afternoon. Students circled the mat, murmuring with amusement as Derek Simmons, the arrogant head instructor, strutted across the floor in his black belt. His eyes were locked on the elderly black janitor mopping near the water coolers. "Hey, old man," Derek called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Want to show us your technique? You know, since you've been watching so much lately." Laughter echoed. The janitor, known only as Mr. James, paused. He was quiet, slow, moving, always polite. No one knew where he lived, how he got the job, or why he was always there at closing. But the way he carried himself, calm, balanced, purposeful, had always felt different. Sarah Lynn, a brown belt and sports psychology grad student, stepped in. "Come on, Derek. That's not funny." But Mr. James simply set his mop aside. "You want me to spar?" he asked, voice low, almost amused. "Just for fun," Derek grinned. "Don't worry. I'll go easy." James nodded. "Then I accept. One condition. You apologize if I teach you something." More laughter. Derek shrugged, cocky and confident. "Sure." They squared up on the mat. Derek launched forward with a rapid strike, but missed. James stepped aside, not with speed, but with precision. Another punch. Another miss. Kick. Miss. Grapple. Slip. Within 2 minutes, Derek was exhausted, confused, sweating heavily. James hadn't landed a single blow, but Derek had never touched him. The studio was silent now. Sarah's eyes widened. She was recording. James moved like water, his footwork effortless, his breathing steady, his awareness razor sharp. It was like watching a master at work. Only no one had realized that's what he was. Finally, Derek tripped over his own stance and fell. James helped him up and simply said, "Thank you." The crowd erupted. Sarah uploaded the clip with the caption, "Janitor humiliates arrogant black belt without throwing a single punch." It went viral in under 24 hours. The next morning, Sarah approached Mr. James again. "Sir, may I ask, who are you?" He hesitated, then smiled. "My name is James Washington, but years ago, they called me Silent Storm." Her jaw dropped. Silent Storm was a 5-time undefeated MMA world champion. A living legend who had vanished from the public eye over a decade ago. Sarah's research confirmed it. Same eyes, same footwork, same calm power. Derek was forced to publicly apologize and to re-examine everything he thought he knew about martial arts, respect, and ego. James refused interviews, but Sarah convinced him to return, not as a janitor, but as a frere, teacher. 3 months later, Master Washington was leading weekly classes in philosophy and movement, not just teaching technique, but character. The studio changed. Bravado disappeared. Humility returned. Even Derek began showing up, early, bowing lower, listening more. One afternoon, Sarah asked James why he came back at all. He answered simply, "Because you can only stay invisible so long before someone needs your voice." And she nodded, because she understood. James Washington had spent years cleaning floors others walked on. But in doing so, he had watched, listened, and waited until the right moment to remind everyone that true strength is not in domination, but in mastery of self. She spoke Dutch and turned the entire company upside down. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Zoe Carter, a hotel maid in her late 20s, was quietly dusting the chandelier in the main lobby of the prestigious Belgrave Grand Hotel. Her uniform was crisp, but unremarkable. Most guests didn't notice her. Management certainly didn't, until the phone rang and everything changed. Zoe answered the line, then seamlessly switched into flawless Dutch, her tone calm but urgent. A professor from Leiden University was on the other end. She handled the entire call with professional poise, unaware that just a few feet away stood Richard Langford, the billionaire owner of the hotel chain. He paused mid-step. Did she just speak Dutch? He asked his assistant, stunned. Before she could respond, Thomas Gates, the hotel's general manager, stormed toward Zoe. What do you think you're doing answering that phone? He barked. This isn't your place. Zoe calmly apologized, but the damage was done. Within hours, she was threatened with suspension for overstepping. She returned to her tiny shared apartment that night, defeated, but not broken. Because what no one knew was that Zoe Carter had a degree in linguistics, spoke 6 languages fluently, and had applied over 100 times for internal advancement, only to be ignored. But Richard Langford wasn't like the others. The next morning, he summoned Zoe to his office. I'd like to know who you really are, he said simply. Zoe told him everything. How she had once dreamed of working in international hospitality, how her applications kept vanishing, and how certain executives had made it clear that maids weren't meant for management. Richard listened. Then quietly, he asked for her rum. What followed was an internal investigation that turned the company inside out. Zoe provided emails, testimonies, and patterns of hiring bias that had long been swept under the rug: nepotism, discrimination, opportunities given to less qualified friends and relatives of upper management. Her documentation was meticulous. Within a week, several department heads were suspended. Thomas Gates was dismissed. Zoe? She was promoted to Vice President of Diversity and International Relations, the first black woman on the company's executive board. 6 months later, she launched a new hiring initiative called Invisible Talents, focused on identifying overlooked employees with high potential. Under her leadership, 43 former cleaners, porters, and kitchen staff were retrained and promoted. And the Belgrave Grand. It went from being just another luxury hotel to becoming a case study in transformation featured in international business journals and DEI conferences worldwide. Zoe never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. So she made it her mission to ensure no one else with brilliance in their soul and dignity in their work would ever be overlooked again. They invited her as a joke, but she showed up like a queen and blew them all away. The gala invitation wasn't meant to be sincere. Victoria James, a quiet cleaning lady at Blackwood Enterprises, found the gold-embossed card stuffed in her locker with no envelope. It was a cruel prank one that Richard Blackwood, the arrogant CEO, orchestrated for his own amusement. She'll show up in a thrift store dress, he chuckled to his boardroom colleagues. Let's see what happens when Cinderella crashes the ball. But what none of them knew was this. Victoria wasn't just a cleaning woman. She was Victoria Blackwood James, the secret rightful heir to the Blackwood fortune. And she had spent the last 2 years gathering evidence, not dust. On the night of the gala, guests gasped as Victoria entered the room in a custom black satin gown, elegant as royalty. Her hair was flawless, her posture regal, and her presence undeniable. Whispers followed her as she walked confidently through the marble hall. Who is she? One whispered. She's stunning, said another. Richard's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected her to show up, much less like this. As the speeches began, Victoria requested the microphone. I won't take much of your time, she said, her voice calm. But there's a story that needs to be told. A story about legacy, lies, and justice. The room fell silent. She pulled out an envelope. Inside, a DNA test, a handwritten confession from a former family attorney, and a copy of her father's original will documents proving she was the daughter of William Blackwood, the late founder of the company. Richard's smirk vanished. You see, Victoria continued. Richard knew about me. He paid people to keep me silent. He changed the company records. He buried my name because he feared what would happen if the truth came out. She then gestured toward David Chun, a renowned inheritance attorney standing at her side. Tonight, I'm here to claim what's mine, not out of vengeance, but to restore what was stolen. The crowd erupted into stunned murmurs. Richard tried to interrupt, but Victoria raised her hand. I have witnesses, documents, and most importantly, the truth. I was never just a cleaner. I was watching, listening, waiting. She stepped down to applause that grew louder with every step. The fallout was swift. Richard was arrested days later on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice. An independent audit revealed years of financial misconduct. Victoria had it all documented. The company's board voted unanimously to remove him, and a judge upheld Victoria's claim to the Blackwood estate. But Victoria didn't stop at reclaiming power. She established the Freeman Foundation, named after her mother's family, who had been denied their legacy for generations. The foundation funded scholarships, career training, and housing for underrepresented communities. She turned the Blackwood Empire into a force for beer justice. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the same gala stage, this time not as a guest, but as CEO. The greatest triumph, she told the audience, is not revenge, but rebuilding what others tried to destroy. The billionaire wasn't expecting help from a child, especially not from a little black girl, with grease on her hands and a spark in her eyes. Andrew Whitaker was stranded on a rural road, staring hopelessly at the engine of his vintage Mustang. Just when he was about to call for a tow, Maya Johnson, a 10-year-old girl from the Propylake nearby garage, approached. "You're missing a coil connector," she said confidently. He laughed at first until she fixed it in under 5 minutes. But what truly stunned him wasn't her mechanical skill. It was the ring she wore, a small, silver band engraved with a date. The same date he had promised a young girl at the now demolished Little Angels orphanage that he'd help her find a home. That girl had vanished when the orphanage shut down under mysterious circumstances. Maya was that child, and the more he listened, the more horrifying the truth became. His father, Howard Whitaker, had secretly experimented on gifted children like Maya in orphanages across the state. Together, Maya and Andrew exposed everything in a national broadcast, uncovering corruption, abuse, and stolen futures. Sometimes the smallest hands carry the loudest truths. Maya reminded us that courage isn't about age. It's about standing up when the world expects you to stay silent. No matter who you are, your voice matters. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. What's one truth you believe the world needs to hear? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real, powerful stories that inspire justice and hope.